Hey friends, and welcome back. You are on a ride along with Indoor Environmental SafeSpace. My name is Mike McNatt, and on this ride along, I wanted to take some time to talk about where I find mold the most in residential homes in my area of operation, which is Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, and surrounding areas. So we're a hot, humid region. If you're in a hot, humid region, Florida, somewhere down through the south, you might very likely have the same ecological conditions we have here and find mold in many of the same places. So let's start off with the number one place I find mold, and that's any place that is below grade. So below grade means below ground. If your home is sitting on a pier and beam crawl space foundation, or if you have a basement or a wine cellar, or anything that is built below the grade of the outside surrounding land, then that is a high-risk area for moisture intrusion. Mother Nature has a way of water getting into places that we try to waterproof. So once we get water in a place below ground, you run the risk of getting mold growth. Now, I tend to think basements may be a little less risky, especially a finished basement where people occasionally go down and look around, because if there's mold growth down there, people are potentially going to find it. Or if there's water intrusion or moisture intrusion, people are going to discover it. But crawl spaces are a different story. Crawl spaces are very seldom accessed by occupants of the home. So if you live in a home with a crawl space, it's highly recommended to have your crawl space inspected periodically. So crawl spaces would be my number one pick for where I find mold the most often, with basements and wine cellars and other subgrade spaces a close runner-up. So number two on the list would be in HVAC systems. Now, depending on what part of the country you live in, you may have a different heating and ventilation and cooling mechanical system design than we have here in Texas in a hot, humid region. But here, typically, newer construction is going to have side flow units. They're laid on their side and installed up in an attic, and the return ducts are up in the ceiling, and the supply ducts, which are the smaller ones, they're about the size of a shoebox, and that's where the air is returned to the house after being heated or cooled. Those are also in the ceiling. Typically, we will find mold growing on the supply registers, the smaller one where the air is coming from the unit back into the house. And this can occur for a number of reasons. So that's the number one place I recommend people look, is get a flashlight, a good bright flashlight. Look past the directional fins that are closest to you when you're looking up at a supply register, and look back at the metal louvers that are up in the supply register for splotchiness or spottiness or discoloration that looks like it may be mold growth. And if you see anything, by all means, that would be a good time to call a professional to have them come out and check it for you. That covers the second most common area that I find mold in residential homes is crawl spaces, number one. Number two is going to be in HVAC systems, most predominantly in the supply registers. And number three is going to be in any cabinet with a sink. Bathroom cabinets, kitchen sink cabinets, laundry room cabinets, if they have a sink in there, very, very prone to mold growth when you have leaks underneath the sinks. So the rule of thumb there is check under your sinks often. Just pull things out and look to see if you've had any leaking. Now, the area of risk that's the highest underneath the cabinet is going to be below the base shelf of the cabinet. Typically, underneath cabinets, below the base shelf, there is a structural cavity underneath there. And if you try to look underneath the cabinet, your view is blocked by what's called a toe kick. That's a little piece of wood from the bottom of the base shelf of the cabinet, underneath it, down to the floor, and that's to keep dust from going up underneath the cabinet and collecting and other things from getting up underneath there. But if water gets underneath there, there's not enough airflow to allow the water to effectively evaporate, and the longer that water sits there, the more chance a mold spore has of finding it and feeding on the wood that makes up the cabinet. There's the food source. We have water accumulation. We have very little air movement, causing that water to evaporate, so the mold has enough time in order to colonize. And last but not least would be any external penetration, doors and windows. Windows can leak from the outside if there's a gap in the caulking. If you suspect you're having any water intrusions around doors and windows, be sure to contact a qualified professional to A, have it inspected for mold, and B, potentially have that door and window water tested to see if there's any potential sources of water intrusion. So we're going to wrap up this video here. I hope you learned something. I hope this information is useful and helpful. Thanks for riding along with me today. My name is Mike McNatt, and as always, wishing you and your family health and happiness in your indoor environmental safe space. Until we see you again, take care.